after COVID, decided they didn't want to go back to work for all sorts of reasons. Many of them are professional and graduates. So we need to have a conversation about why that is happening. Secondly, very large numbers of people on long-term sick because they can't get NHS appointments, they can't go back to work. That just demonstrates another conversation we have to have about our broken health system. And thirdly, EU migrants who have left, a clear message from our government that they're not welcome here, and for all sorts of reasons they've left and they're not coming back. Those are the three drivers of the 1 million that are missing. It's a panel in itself to talk about each one of those. I'm not going to go into all those now, but that is something I think we need to talk about. And my final point would be that we have left the European Union. As a result, there's a points-based migration system which applies to the whole world now. Before it was just to non-EU citizens. Now it's to EU and non-EU. That is the system. We're certainly not for the foreseeable future going to go back into the EU. We're not going to go back to the entirely free movement of labour. But what we need to do is massively improve the points-based migration system so that we can address the huge short-term challenges that we're facing now in terms of things like HGV lorry drivers, fruit pickers. Let's have a much more flexible system rather than the one-size-fits-all straitjacket that the government is currently imposing on the labour market and making it very difficult for employers to bring labour from the European Union and elsewhere. So I hope that that's my 5 minutes. Lots to get our teeth into there, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And our last panel member is Sunder Kawala. He is the Director of British Future, a non-partisan identity and integration think tank and registered charity. He was a journalist and General Secretary of the Fabian Society from 2003 to 2011. And if you haven't read his National Conversation Report of September 2018, which was coordinated by British Future and the Hope Not Hate group, an amazing piece of work which sets out a model for deeper public engagement, much needed in our approach, I feel, to immigration. I think what's been said here. So, Sunder, thank you.
Thanks very much for the invitation. It's great to be here to take part in the conversation. What British Future would like to see is an inclusive, confident, welcoming Britain, which means you've got to work with the confidence that we feel sometimes, but also the anxieties that people feel in our society about how it's changing and how can it be fair to everybody, those who come to this country and the communities they join, so we build common ground together. We've been doing this work for about 10 years and we've been marking our 10th anniversary recently around the Jubilee, and so looking actually at several of the changes that we've seen over that period. And we've had a very volatile decade in Britain where, the Brexit debate, and then when we finally ended that, we had COVID as well, and we had the anti-racism protests during COVID, and in a way the new normal now is that these, the pace of change of these debates is there, and I think we have to, in all of that, just, maintain that sense that what we're trying to do is be more inclusive, be more confident, be fair to everybody, and try not to set up these debates about whether we're fair to migrants or to people on, the other side of town who were born here, but that you need a shared fairness agenda. The answer to the question where do the workers go, Stephen gave us, some of the big questions to look at. Nobody entirely knows all of the answers here because the data has got harder to collect during COVID. Lots of different things happened to younger people in the workforce who are the newest entrants, to older people in the workforce who might have decided to stay out of it or fell out of it or had health issues. We're not entirely sure about the data about migration, who left, who stayed, where they went, because we never knew how many people were here in the first place, and then we don't know how many people left or how many people came back. And we get the census at the end of the month, people will be able to put the jigsaw together and work out what we were wrong about all along and so on. But there was definitely some important challenges. On immigration in particular, it was very much a decade of two halves, because governments of both parties didn't have public confidence in how we were managing immigration when it was happening for all sorts of different reasons. People like Poles that they've met and other East Europeans that they've met, but they didn't think the governments handled that well or fairly. So we had a very polarising immigration debate, and we had the Brexit debate, and we've got a new point system and so on. remarkably in our research, the immigration debate with the public has changed a great deal. For these reasons, nobody really could say I'm not allowed to talk about that issue anymore. We clearly talk about that issue, and lots have changed. Also, you stop having a yes or no, one-size-fits-all debate. You start asking questions of what do you want to do about doctors and nurses and care workers and fruit pickers and students and refugees and people who drive lorries and people who cross the channel. And actually the public is somewhat more pragmatic when you get to this level of question about this. And so we've actually seen a significant shift. And then COVID actually changed attitudes quite a lot in terms of values in our society. We asked the question 10 years ago, what is immigration been good for in our society and what has it been bad for? People thought it been brilliant for food, been quite good for football, but they were worried about its impact on housing in particular, and they weren't sure on the health service. They were on the fence. Maybe it's a bit negative because there were more people in the surgeries. That's moved 40 percentage points. So immigration is tremendously good for our National Health Service because we're more aware of the role of the National Health Service as this symbol of something that people from all backgrounds contribute to, that we all benefit from. And it wasn't just the health service, it was all the other essential work in our society. So the public have changed, and has government policy changed? Obviously the Rwanda policy shows us that we're having this very heated and polarised debate that actually reflects the attitudes of 20 years ago, I think. But actually government policy has actually been quite moderate and quite liberal on immigration policy quite quietly. We've got more open student migration than we had, and it's easier to stay if you're a student. We have more open non-EU migration than we had while we've got tighter EU migration. So I don't think the answer is always going to be more migration. It's going to be thinking about how we deal with the people who are here. Two examples of that. We've got 3 different welcoming schemes happening in this country at once. We've got a Ukrainian scheme where the government were much too slow to do what the public wanted, and 40,000 people have now got somebody Ukrainian living with them, but they had to battle the system to get that to happen. But that is going to create a level of contact between refugees and British people on a scale we haven't seen. We should be doing that across streets, not just for Ukrainians. Whether Ukrainian women can work depends on childcare. They're here probably, they'd love to be here temporarily for the war to end. It will depend on the support they have. We've got people mostly often with connections to Britain and relatively good language skills and so on. We've also got a lot of people coming in from Hong Kong to this country. 120,000 people last year have had to leave Hong Kong. Lots of different people, a lot of families with children, and that's gone quite well as a system, but people are not going to be working in the jobs that they could do when they come over from Hong Kong because their qualifications won't be relevant if you're in education or if you're in childcare. And so there's lots of things to do to make sure that people don't work underneath the skill level they should do. And there's also a levelling up question, Stephen. I think where do those people go? Because if they all just go to the southeast of England, that won't help us with the levelling up. So what do we do about that? And we had Afghanistan as well, and we had a responsibility to people from Afghanistan who evacuated from an airport. It was the right thing to do, but a year later they're all stuck in hotels. And if we do not get people into accommodation and English language skills for people who need it, we're going to be a long way from people getting jobs. So working on the groups that are here is very important. That's also true. We've now got as many vacancies as there are unemployed people in this country, but obviously not in the same places. It's again the levelling up point. But ethnic minority unemployment is higher. Ethnic minority youth unemployment is much higher. And so I really want to see the big companies in this country, whether they're law firms or supermarkets everywhere, really making sure actually that black and Pakistani, Bangladeshi unemployment, especially youth unemployment, should be at the level of white unemployment. The education results for these groups are very similar and often higher than the white British education results, but the employment rates are much lower. And so I would really put a challenge to the employers before they say in hospitality and so on we might need more flexibility on visas. I'm willing to listen to that case, but I'm willing to listen to it much more when we actually see youth unemployment levels. So I think we've heard a lot about flexibility in the workplace, and workers have to be flexible, but employers have to be flexible. To students that want Saturday jobs and young people, to mothers and fathers with caring responsibilities who want to work. So again, I think there's a challenge to make sure that people who are already here can get the chances in the labour market, as well as making sure that people who come to this country get the support on language, on qualifications that they need to not be underemployed or not using the skills that they had when they contribute to our society. So there's a lot of work for us all to do together, but I think we should be checking what the data tells us about where the pinch points are, but ready, I think, to see migration and domestic skills as two sides of the same coin, not a choice. You have to make one or the other.
Start with the first one then. How do we square the real global needs and opportunities for the UK economy with the tabloid-led hostile environment narrative? Can we ever resolve this? So, talked about the hospital. Stephen, would you like to answer that one?
Yes. Yeah, I can see it.
Oh, here we go. Thank you.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think it goes back to something that Sunder was saying around the shift from a very polarised and emotive debate around immigration, which we knew played a major role in the run-up to the Brexit referendum and indeed the result of it, to where we are now, which I think is a far more pragmatic attitude in terms of public opinion. So I think there is an opportunity there to build on that and to say, look, as Fuad was saying, this is an opportunity, not a threat. We need talent from around the world. It's good for our culture, good for our society, good for our economy. We need to ensure that there is a well-managed system in place, because if you don't have a well-managed system, then those who do come here are not going to be receiving a warm welcome, because people will have that fear of exponential immigration, which we know drives the polarisation and the emotive debate that we don't want to go back to. So we've got to learn the lessons from that, have that well-managed, fair system in place. And once we begin to demonstrate that we can create a labour market and an immigration system that actually work in tandem with each other, then I think we can start to square the circle that is outlined there. A big part of that on work-based migration is, I think, to have a much better conversation between employers and trade unions and government. Right now, the work-based system, the points-based system, is simply a one-size-fits-all. You've got to have a sponsor employer, you've got to be making more than £25,000 a year, and you've got to be able to speak English to a certain level. And basically tick those boxes, and if you can, that's how you get in, that's how you get a work visa. We need a much more nuanced conversation, which is where employers and trade unions and governments sit down together and say, in this sector, whether it's construction or hospitality or whatever it might be, this is what we actually need. And government says to the employers and the trade unions, okay, fine, but what's your plan for also investing in young people in your local area, getting the skills they need, recruiting and training people so that you're getting more productivity and a much better skills agenda. That conversation isn't happening at all. And that, I think, is a reform that we need to the system. And we could even get to a point where every year the Home Secretary comes to Parliament and says, we've had a sector-by-sector discussion across each area of industry, and we've come to the conclusion that we need this many this much imported labour in that sector, and here's the sector plan for skills and training to go with it, to make sure that we're not just solving the problems of skills and absent workers by bringing in labour from, we're also creating opportunities for local people and young people in the local area. So you need a plan that's based on that dialogue and a much more nuanced system than we currently have, and I think that would help to square that circle as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Would any of the other two panellists like to comment on that, or do you think that was a full question? No. Okay. My Slido's gone over there, so I'm going to read. It had all the transport questions on as well, so I don't think it's quite right. So, Fuad, would you like to answer this one? With unemployment in the UK at an all-time low of 3.7%, why does anyone think we are not desperate to have more immigrants and refugees? Would you like to start off with that one?
Yes, I mean, to start with, we've got 1 million vacancies to fill. But let me take one step back and for what we were just saying earlier in terms about the misinformation that's going around, which is creating this hostile environment. At the moment, it's well publicized such there's about 100 million people that's displaced around the world. And of that 100 million people that are displaced around the world, less than 0.1, 0.2%, ladies and gents, come to UK. Majority of the displaced people are, are actually internally displaced in their home countries or go to the neighboring countries. So the whole idea that refugees, migrants are, coming to take over is not true. Not for Europe, not for UK. If you look at, the number of displaced people that we have. Now coming back to the we've got 3.7% unemployment. Why do we need refugees? Why do we need migrants? So we've got 1 million vacancies. Cost of living is really going up. The solution is not to increase salaries to get to avoid more workers. What we are advocating is that migration is certainly one of the solutions to bring more workers to solve our crisis we have in all the sectors that we are having problems. But to be honest, it's not only migration coming from outside. As we were saying earlier, we also need to look at the people that we have right here in the UK. Let's start from the people who are at asylum. We have now given permission to the people who are at asylum state that they can actually work in the care sector. I would like to see that expanded and given, like many countries in Europe, people who are in asylum, give them the opportunity to work and actually earn money rather than being given a 30 pounds handout or whatever we give out. And the second stage is in terms of the young people, refugees, migrants who are unemployed, who are underemployed. In eastern symbols, to those of you who are from Bristol, I'll just conclude 1 second. There's the unemployment is much more higher than other areas in Bristol. So my view is that giving them the right skills, they can fill these posts. Sorry.
I was going to say, what practical steps can people like us, members of the public, take to help asylum-seeking processing get faster? Is it just a temporary administrative issue, or can we bring pressure to bear on people in some way to just process it faster? We need these people.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. We do.
6.7% unemployment. It's really, really low. We need more people, not fewer.
Yeah. Change British
I think the answer. Yeah, I think the answer is pressure on speed of decisions and good decisions being made quickly is good for everyone. It's good for the health, well-being, contribution of the person coming in, the community they join, and so on. I think what was useful about the Ukraine issue, where 250,000 people said, I'd like to be involved, 60,000 people stayed with it, is that a much broader swathe of the public had their first ever experience of the immigration process in this country and were pretty shocked by that. And so maintaining that pressure is good. Unfortunately, obviously, only governments can make decisions about visas. The rest of us could do more about welcoming. I just want to say something just a little bit challenging here. I think having a economic visa, work visa program that is about economic needs is good. I don't really want a refugee policy in this country that's about economic needs. I want a refugee policy that's about people's need for sanctuary in this country. Now, once I've got that and I'm making good, fast decisions, if we're letting 98% of people who are Syrian get a decision, why is it taking 13 months to find out that 98% of people had a claim? Because you have an interview a year before you have the second interview, and you could just decide it then, and you could make some quick rejections of cases that have got no basis and some very quick acceptances, and then take the complicated issues through and let people get on with their lives. But I would let asylum seekers work if they've been waiting 6 months because of their health, their well-being, their needs for social contact, their need for skills. It will also be good for the local coffee shop that person will work for them. But I just think we should see unlocking the skills and contribution of refugees as good for humanity and the economy. But it's 40,000, 50,000 asylum applications in a year among 1 million. Visas, that's not your economic labour market policy, that should be your humanitarian policy, and being able to work is also where you get dignity in life. So work and skills for refugees is good in itself.
would you like to comment now?
Stephen will have more to say about that, but I think it's a really good lens, and I think we should pause before we start saying, are more work visas the answer? To say until there's a plan for every group for whom it's not 4% but 8% or 12%, which youth unemployment is higher than 4%, youth black unemployment, youth Pakistani British unemployment is higher, as you say, veterans and disability. Employers might have to do quite a lot of work to get people ready to work and to have the confidence to work, and we might need much more flexibility. I think bring back things like Saturday jobs as a kind of cultural norm that we want to see, because it gives people a pattern of work that makes them work ready. So I think until all those numbers are close to 3 or 4%, when there are plans to do that, and it might take time, then we can then look at the pragmatic case for visas. But let's make sure we're doing both.
Stephen?
So very briefly, on the point about why are applications taking so long, it is a mystery to us. When lockdown started, the Home Office decided that they were going to stop doing all interviews with asylum seekers because interviews had to be face-to-face. Why couldn't they be done on Zoom? Nobody knows. But that decision was made. As a result, you already then made a recipe for a disastrous backlog. And since lockdown has lifted, they haven't started again. Not a single asylum processing has taken place in Scotland since March 2020, for example, and it is tiny numbers in England. Now, there are lots of theories about why this might be happening. Call me a skeptic, call me a conspiracy theorist, but perhaps our current Home Secretary actually wants to sow the seeds of chaos in the system so that she can create a narrative about let's ship them all to Rwanda. Call me we cannot find an explanation. We put down written parliamentary questions, we just get a load of fudge in response. But it's an absolute disgrace, and it's costing, apart from anything else, costing the taxpayer £4 million a day to have people in hotels. So I think pressure on your local MP, pressure in Parliament, we've just got to keep up and try and get to the bottom of what the hell is going on in our broken asylum system. Briefly on the point, I absolutely agree that there's so many other opportunities to bring people into the labour market. There's lots of grassroots programmes that are working on that. The European Social Fund, for example, used to have a lot of work in terms of people who are at the margins of the labour market, bringing them back in. We've got to keep that going at if you like, a micro level, a granular level. That means empowering local authorities, empowering local job centres, having much more proactive labour market measures. At the central level, we've got the Skills and Productivity Council, which is a dormant body which doesn't really have a voice in the decision-making process. And I think that has to be brought together, and if we're going to, I completely agree, let's not just say that we want to import labour to solve these problems. Let's look domestically, build skills. I was sort of trying to say earlier, we need a process whereby you set numbers on migration which reflect the need to build local skills, rather than the other way around. And I think so it's a mixture of lots of more local measures. Is the Shared Prosperity Fund actually going to deliver in terms of keeping some of those proactive labour market measures going? I really hope so, but I'm worried because it's kind of stalled at the moment. So there's a lot more we can do, both at the micro level and the macro level.
Yeah, very quickly to add to what you both said. So we train every year close to 3,000 people. And one of the quick wins we can do is all employers to look at the group of the people that you're speaking about, give them opportunities. Start with placements, internships, apprenticeships, all of these things. It's a long-term investment. This is not a quick win where you can put them into some work program and 2 months later there will be a graduate scheme, a graduate entry point. But with what we've learned from working and supporting thousands of people here in Bristol, and we get a sizable number of into employment, that this is really worthwhile, and it has to. The other thing we always argue is that the government, the councillors have to really target and must give investment to these specific people and give them the training that they need. Too often, funding does not. There's not enough money, and if there's enough money, it does not get to enough training and skills for these people. So it can be done, but we all need it to change our mindset of how we can help, and that starts with training, giving opportunities.
I mean, Bristol is an amazing place, isn't it? Not very far from here, at 1 o'clock, there's going to be a huge demonstration about the sending people to Rwanda in the centre. And next week we've got Amal the puppet coming, and today we've got this debate. So I think there's lots and lots of things that's out there in the mix that we can do. So the next question is globally populations are declining in developed countries, and soon there may not be enough migrants to go round. How do we manage migration in the longer term? Sunder, would you like to start with that? I keep asking you, perhaps we should go to...
Some liberal people, some people who are Remainers wanted to not leave the European Union, maybe some of you here in the audience today, had this argument that if you leave the European Union, there won't be enough migrants to go round, you won't be able to get them. We aren't going to have that problem in the near future, and that if we've got much higher immigration now from India, from Nigeria, from the Philippines in the NHS, in work and so on. If you create those opportunities to study and then work in Britain, we shouldn't underestimate that this is an attractive country to come to if we want to be welcoming. People would like to come here. We should make sure we don't do it on terms that are exploitative. We should do it on terms that are integrative. So I don't really think it's that much of a demographic issue. It's a maintaining the confidence and consent of the public. We will do it better if we spread the economy around the UK better, so that we don't have a sort of overheated southeast of England and less population and less people elsewhere. Just one other thing I just want to mention. What are the basics where people aren't be able to get into work, and they'll be different in all these groups? For some people who are further from the labour market, it might be computer skills, it might be literacy, it might be technological skills. So we just have a big investment for that. For refugees of different kinds, English language is so important.
Exactly.
We all know it, and yet we don't always invest in it. So Afghans who are here, 1,000 of them have worked as interpreters for us. A lot of them are young girls who don't speak English in families. It shouldn't be rocket science to not put them in a long queue for ESOL that isn't there, but to have Afghans will do well in this country if young girls and boys are all speaking English and are in education to get jobs. And if we don't do that in the next 2 years, we will never do well with that group. Hong Kongers have got good English, but not the kind of English that will make them confident enough to get graduate jobs of the kind they would be doing in Hong Kong. Are we investing in that? So language is everything for migrants and refugees. Working, we know it, but we don't invest in it.
But of course, they cut a lot of the Section 11. In fact, there are no Section 11 programmes in school anymore. So that's very interesting that you say that. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think the one thing I would add just is let's not forget the other two elements of why we've got this shortage in the labour market. And one is that large numbers of people reassessed their lives during COVID and decided not to go back to work, or at least not to go back to work in the traditional sense of the term. We're going to have a really honest conversation about why that is, and is that sustainable in the long term? And are we a country that just makes it unattractive to work? And that's a big part of this. And the other is a huge challenge we have, which is around Nhs waiting lists.
Yeah.
So a very large part of this 1 million is people who are on long-term sick leave because they're not able to get the appointments and the medical intervention that they need. So I would just say migration is a really important part of this conversation, but there's actually a deep structural issue that we have to deal with. And I kind of feel at the moment that we're living in, particularly on this issue of waiting lists, we're living in a sort of backlog Britain where, there's massive NHS waiting lists. The passport office is in chaos. There's huge issues in terms of our airports. Asylum seekers languishing in hotels. The system is creaking, and we need systemic change, which has to be based on investment and on reform and on modernisation. And this conversation we're having today about the labour market is just one element of that broader issue about our creaking infrastructure as a country.
Okay, I think we might very quickly have one more question. I don't think the 2-minute is up yet. How should we engage with the Great Resignation, and how should we encourage people to work in sectors that are struggling to recruit?
I'm happy to start.
Do.
I think, as you were saying earlier, we really need to have an open and frank discussion about our workplace. Mental health within the workforce is a major issue. A lot of our staff who are frontline, people who actually during COVID, during the pandemic, we've relied on to save lives, I've seen non-stop pressure for 2 years, and then I think thinking how and what we can do to help our workforce is very critical. One of the things is thinking about flexibility. One of the things is about thinking about home working. We really need to rethink and have a very a serious and genuine discussion with our employees. Here at ACH, we're a very small company with only 80 to 100 staff. We've given people the opportunity half of their time to work from home. And that alone, I think, is not enough. One of the things that other companies are doing is that the 4 days week, which I know that have been trialled in UK, and we're waiting to see the results of how much that impacts on the workforce. But just to conclude, I think we really need to rethink our workplace. And as you said, why is it really unattractive? Because what we are seeing, people who do not want to come back, is really staggering.
Sunder, 1 minute.
Yeah.
And then
I think we thought, didn't we, during the pandemic, that we were going to change our thinking about status at work and what we valued and what we didn't value. And if we remembered to do that, we would carry on with that after the pandemic. We will have a better answer to this question, because the challenge will be different in social care or in agriculture, in hotels. But I think the esteem, experience of work that you have, whether you want to go into work, whether you feel valued at work, is a big part of this, as well, of course, about pay and conditions and so on. So there'll be lots of different issues, but I think we've got to remember what we all realised about. It's not always high salary in terms of what is socially important in us.
thank you very much. Last word to Stephen.
Yeah, it's radical change is needed, and the reality is that we've seen in the last decades a massive shift in the British economy away from production and towards consumption, away from the labour interest, the labour share of the economy, to capital and profiteering and rent seeking. We have seen vast increases in CEOs' salaries, while working people have been struggling to get by. And I think that it's not rocket science. Part of the reason that people haven't wanted to come back to work is because they felt, particularly with the looming cost of living crisis, it's not actually worth it. What you pay to put petrol in your car makes it not worth going to work. What people are having to pay on childcare. What happened to Sure Start? Sure Start was a massive boost for working families, so that they could actually know that they could put their kids into a safe and good place whilst they went to work. All of that's been taken away. So we've had years of policies that have actually been anti-growth, because if you remove the support that an enabling state should be giving to people, you're going to discourage them from going to work. That means less money for the exchequer, which in turn increases debt and reduces growth. So we need a radical worker-based set of policies, much more fairness baked into the system, and I'm afraid that is going to mean that shareholders and CEOs are going to have to review the way they want their workplaces to work, because otherwise those people are never going to come back to work, and everybody's going to suffer as a result.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much to our panel. We've been talking about honest conversations, serious and generous conversations, was what Fuad said. I think this has been one of those. Thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you very much for coming here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. Really good. Thank you.